If you think the pandemic is on its way out, well, I've got 278 reasons why you should probably put that mask back on. And if you're not used to your elected leaders giving straight answers to simple questions, well, maybe you haven't chatted with incoming Multnomah County DA Mike Schmidt.
You want to eliminate cash bail entirely?
Yes.
And he's got some big ideas to change policing in Portland. But he's not the only one with ideas.
We're starting to shift the conversation from law and order to public health.
Tomorrow, Portland could show us what defund the police looks like in practice. And don't call it Chaz, but Portland gets its own autonomous zone. And if you blink, you might miss it. Here's the story.
Hey, all right. Hey, guys, I'm Dan Haggerty. Welcome to The Story. I know your phone is in reach. It always is. Mine's right over there staring at me. So go grab yours, open it up, grab it. Let's talk. Reach out on Facebook or Instagram. Email us at thestory@kgw.com or fire up Twitter. Use that hashtag HeyDan. Just have something to say because we are always listening. And that said, let's start by talking about the enormously tiny elephant of a virus in the room. And I think viewer Sarah Vox gives us a great place to begin here. She says, "Hey Dan, can you please do a segment covering face masks? It seems it could really help us stay healthy if people would wear them, but many are not. With this delayed reopening, it is worth discussing what we as citizens can do." I'll be honest with you, I kind of dismissed this email at first. I kind of thought the mask thing was understood, especially after Oregon posted its 2 worst days in a row of new cases. Yesterday, we broke a record with 184 new cases. Today, we blew past that and broke a record again with 278 new cases. And all of those cases in that 2-day period, 218 were in Union County in rural northeast Oregon. See, it's not really just a matter of cities being too big and too dense. Rural communities thinking that they are in the clear are not entirely. We're all at risk, cities and towns, both, which is why I was a little surprised to find out just how many anti-maskers there are out there. I posted this picture on Facebook and asked why people don't wear masks. And between my page and the KGW page, we got more than 1,000 comments. Paige Stroud said, "Because they're proven useless. Give me a break." Josh Paris said, "Who cares? It's no one's business but their own." And Liz Steimer said, "Wear a black one and feel like a ninja." One of you is exactly right. You do feel like a ninja. But let's focus on the other two because they seem to be the most prevalent reasons people have for not wearing a mask. While masks are not a perfect solution, they are not. They're also not useless. Look, we've talked about this so many different times, right? When we take a breath or we cough or we talk or we laugh, when you disagree with something I say and you go, yeah, right. The particles go out into the air, and if you have the virus and someone breathes those in, it could make them sick. But when you cover your mouth with a mask or with an elbow or a hand for that matter, it limits the number of particles that go flying across the room, and the particles that do don't go as far. Masks can also help us from touching our face, but as you can see from the picture I posted, it's not foolproof, and I've proven time and time again that little is. But what are our options here? What tools do we really have to fight this? We can wash our hands, right? Wear the masks. We can do social distancing. That's kind of the trifecta, the 3 things we can do. The last one has really seemed to work. We've seen that work in practice. Cases dropped. We flattened the curve when we shut everything down. But businesses, they can't do this for much longer. Iconic Portland spots, places like Pok Pok, they're closing down most of their locations. Blue Star, the donut place, they've closed down a bunch of shops. But we're learning that to keep businesses from dying, we have to risk lives instead. States that reopened early, places like Florida and Texas and Arizona, they have all seen daily spikes of more than 1,000 cases, in some cases even more than 2,000 cases in those spots. New predictions, as of right now, they think that COVID-19 will kill 200,000 people in America by October 1st. That would make it the 3rd leading cause of death in the U.S. behind heart disease and cancer. And even if that isn't enough to convince you that we're not at the tail end of all this, consider that Beijing, China is on lockdown right now, again, after a new spike in cases. So please, do your part. Wear something. Send the right message out there that we are all in this together. And I am not saying that as some symbolic phrase of unity. I mean it very literally. The health of our loved ones and our economies, our futures, need us to do everything we possibly can to minimize the devastation of this virus. So wear a mask, even if you think it only helps a little. We need a help, even a little. Plus, if you wear a black one, you'll feel like a ninja. All right, let's get to our big story tonight, which is one of the many areas where both COVID-19 and the fight for racial justice intersect. And we're talking about Portland's budget, which was gutted by the pandemic, and how much of it should be dedicated to the Portland Police Bureau. See, the city council is expected to vote tomorrow to strip millions of dollars from them. You know those chants, defund the police. That's exactly what we're talking about here. Taking money from the police and redirecting the dollars to services that help with education and mental health and social services. See, even President Trump signed an executive order today. Now, not defunding authorities, but incentivizing them to update their use of force standards, creating a database to share information about officers with records of abuse, and urging officers to bring mental health experts to calls that involve the homeless or drugs or other emergencies like that. And that last bit is what we want to get into right now, because Portland already has at least one of those alternative programs in the works here. It's called the Street Response Team. It's not even off the ground yet, to be honest, but Maggie Vespa learned it's about to expand big time.
This is admittedly a little weird, but to tell you a story about Portland's Street Response Team, I have to show you video from Eugene. That's for two reasons. Number one, the Street Response Team is based off of a program in Eugene called Cahoots. For decades, it's let 911 operators here send teams of paramedics and mental health professionals to calls involving homelessness, drug use, and mental health emergencies. Things that aren't violent, but in most cities fall into the laps of local police. Not here. The second reason we're showing you this video is because Portland's Street Response Team isn't a reality yet. The city had set aside $500,000 to get it up and running in the spring of this year, but like most things, the pandemic brought that to a grinding halt.
My heart wanted to go out, but I didn't want to do anything that might hurt the program or myself.
It's made Tremaine Clayton's job sort of awkward. After the city announced plans to officially fund the project last year, Clayton was the first paramedic with Portland Fire allocated to the city's Street Response Team. A project similar to Cahoots, it aims at forming a more sensitive response to emergencies that arise in a housing crisis. It's also designed to give police some relief from having to serve as social workers, instead letting them focus on violent crimes. But thanks to coronavirus and to the city's subsequent hiring freeze, efforts to launch this team this year froze too. For months, Clayton has been literally the only person on it.
So I just maintained just the administrative side of it, not so much the outreach that I had been doing.
But now that's on track to change. Protests, riots, and national conversations about community policing are pushing cities to rethink long-held spending norms, especially when it comes to using taxpayer dollars to protect the taxpayers. Here in Portland, Commissioner Joanne Hardesty came out with a big pitch, pushing the city to cut $4.8 million from the police bureau and instead use it to beef up and finally launch the Street Response Team. If she gets her way, and if the city lifts its hiring freeze, Portland could have 6 teams of paramedics and mental health experts responding to 911 calls by this fall.
I'm hoping that we're starting to shift the conversation from law and order to public health. And so if you're looking at what's happening on our street through a public health lens, your job is to do no harm.
The council's budget vote is tomorrow. Hardesty expects the move to be approved. That said, she wants to be clear. This is one of several changes she wants to see made to address the pain and rage rippling throughout this country.
I don't think that the Portland Street Response will address the historic racist, white supremacist policies that have been in place since the United States of America was born. It won't do anything to change that dynamic at all. But what we know is that people targeted for arrests, targeted for severe sentencing, are Black and brown people. So anything we can do to make sure that we are diverting people from an unjust criminal justice system will help everyone.
So Maggie Vespa joining us now. I know there are a few things that have to happen, but it kind of sounds like this is a go.
Yeah, Hardesty definitely thinks so, and Clayton does too. And basically, there has been a debate in this budget process about how much money to take away from the police bureau, but this $4.8 million for the Street Response Team specifically hasn't been a point of contention. So it definitely seems like this is a go. And again, that vote is tomorrow.
Right. And it sounds like your conversation with Tremaine Clayton was really interesting as well.
Yeah, it was. And I want to play more of it now, because the street response team focuses on mental health. And right now, as a nation, we're obviously having a needed conversation about race. Still, Clayton was and is the first member of this program that was born out of a desire to have a better sort of strategy around community policing. And then, that program was sidelined because of the pandemic. And then in the meantime, this conversation about police tactics and all this anger exploded. So he's just kind of been on the sidelines watching this. And so basically, I just asked him what that's been like.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely one of those things where it's hard. I've had my personal struggles growing up, being mixed, definitely questions more than average than most of my friends. But on the professional side, I have a great working relationship with Portland Police specifically. And so it's really I really do feel for a lot of the police officers just being in this unfortunate event of divide. Yes, this will have an impact on those marginalized communities. I mean, the focus really was the mental health that as a marginalized community, homelessness as a marginalized community, but now we're bringing in this racial component that has always been underlying. And I think that was just kind of the court release. So, I mean, all those problems we were focusing on, I think this definitely, you can't ignore it now. You can't ignore it now, so.
All right, and per usual, we will have so much more on this story and more from our interviews at kgw.com, Dan.
All right, and look for it there. And also remember to follow Maggie on all the social platforms. Maggie, thank you.
Sure.
Now, we could see some changes at the state level, too. Governor Kate Brown has called a special session. It will start next Wednesday to address police reform and the pandemic. Now, you might remember how the last legislative session ended earlier this year. Lawmakers got a total of, 3 bills passed. Out of the more than 100, they passed 3 of them. And that's because, once again, they couldn't quite agree on cap and trade, and Republicans walked out. In fact, the same thing happened the year prior to that as well. So are Republicans going to participate this time? We asked in the Senate GOP caucus. They told us probably, but they're not too happy about the session, saying that they need to focus on the state budget before anything else, since that wasn't passed earlier this year. Governor Brown says that she's going to call a second special session this summer to deal with the budget. But in the meantime, it does look like some of these issues do have support from both sides. The People of Color Caucus say they have Republican support on their police accountability proposals, and Senate Republican leader Fred Girard's office says that he is in favor of banning chokeholds and some other reforms. So what's on the table for COVID-19 response? We know both sides want to protect the CARES Act payments and focus on economic recovery. The governor also wants to make some of her executive orders into law, like the eviction moratorium. We're going to continue covering all of it next week, and keep you updated as things get passed and what doesn't, and what it all means for you.
Getting arrested is a traumatic thing.
Multnomah County's incoming district attorney wants to know, is it even worth it to prosecute protesters who break the law? And we go back into the KGW vault for more of our 1967 documentary on the Albina neighborhood and the nightmare of apartment hunting while black.
They said, don't call us, we'll call you.
And Mill End's Autonomous Zone just doesn't quite have the same ring as Chaz. When the story continues.
Welcome back to the story. Thank you so much for joining the conversation online. Lots to talk about nowadays, and we're hearing a lot from you, so thank you. And of course, you can always use that hashtag #HeyDan on Twitter. Facebook works really well too. Let's have a conversation there, or on Instagram, or email us at thestory@kgw.com. Lots of different ways to reach out. Obviously, a lot of conversations that we're having right now are about the protests over police violence against black people, and beyond that, what we can do to change that. Yesterday, we showed you some of my conversation with the guy whose job it is to make those changes, incoming Multnomah County District Attorney Mike Schmidt. He was elected last month in a landslide to replace current DA Rod Underhill. And speaking of Rod Underhill, just minutes ago, the Oregonian reported that he will be stepping down as DA on July 31st, citing the death of George Floyd and the need to reject racism, bigotry, and hatred, which means Mike Schmidt will be taking over a little earlier than he anticipated. Now, if you watched yesterday, you saw us talk to him about some of the changes that he wants to see. And the topic of cash bail came up. And I wanted to follow up with that today, especially given this breaking news about Rod Underhill. To revisit the bail conversation quickly, just so I have clarity, do you want to eliminate cash bail entirely?
Yes. I think we should be looking at, is it equitable to hold somebody in jail, to deprive them of their liberty because they don't have money? I think it's a fair thing to deprive someone of their liberty if we need to do that in order to ensure the safety of the community. That I think is fair. Or I think it's okay to do that and fair and constitutionally okay to do it if they continue to not show up to court. At some point, somebody has to be held so that they can be held accountable. But if the reason we're holding you is because you don't have money, I think that, quite frankly, we have constitutional problems with that. And it obviously cuts across communities that are less likely to have money. Minority communities who have been disadvantaged for decades and centuries are going to be more likely to fall into the category of not having the resources. So yeah, I think money is a bad proxy for who should be let out and who should be held in our jails. I'd like to eliminate it altogether. We have to have a serious conversation about how then, what mechanisms then do we use to hold people when they are not safe to be released or they never show up. But those are things that we can do. And there are jurisdictions around the country that have had those conversations, and we can learn from their successes and some of their failures.
Talk to me about the protesters. So police have arrested at least 200 protesters, more at this point, over the past couple of weeks. Those are going to be headed to your office. What is your stance on how those people should be, you could even, what happens, I guess? Let me just start from the beginning. When you have this many people being arrested during these types of protests, how does that look when it shows up to your office?
Yeah. Right now, I imagine what it looks like is the district attorney's office is screening probably on a daily basis between 20 and 50 reports from the night before to make and determine whether or not there's probable cause for charges to be filed. And then they make that decision. They are challenging to prosecute. The district attorney's office took a case recently, not from these protests, but from prior protests, to trial. And the jury acquitted the woman of the charges of interfering with a peace officer and disorderly conduct. It's very hard to convince a jury that when somebody is exercising their constitutional rights to free speech, that's a good use of our resources to prosecute them criminally and then try to, impose some sort of a punishment on them. Quite frankly, I think for most people, your typical protester, a lot of them are, they're there, they're nonviolent, obvious. They don't have a history of getting arrested or a record like that. Getting arrested is a traumatic thing. I think we could consider whether or not that might be punishment enough for not listening to a police officer in the moment, and question whether or not it really is worth our community's resources to have them get appointed a public defender, go through a trial process, just to ultimately have a Multnomah County jury end up acquitting them. So I think the district attorney's office has its work cut out for it in reviewing these cases and then considering what really is the best way to handle these.
We had a long and really interesting conversation. Back to that cash bail conversation for just a moment, though. He pointed to a few places that have already gotten rid of cash bail, like Washington, D.C. And we found some numbers from 2015 just to see how it all panned out for them. Basically, it worked out that for every 10 people D.C. courts held pre-trial, 100 people were released without bail. And of those 100 who were released, 11 of them were rearrested, 2 of them for violent crimes. So those are their statistics. The former head of D.C.'s pre-trial system said at the time that the truly dangerous people are held, and from the stats there you can see that most of the time they're right. If you want to see the rest of my conversation with Mike Schmidt, it's on the KGW YouTube page right now, including the moment his electronic vacuum turned on in the middle of the interview. Thanks to the magic of editing, we were able to skip past that for you right now. But hey, while you're on there, if you're checking out that interview, please hit the subscribe button. We'd really appreciate it. We've been showing you some clips from a documentary KGW aired in 1967 about Portland's Albina neighborhood, where the majority of the city's black people, that community, lived at that time. It was a product of redlining, where banks denied mortgages to people of color, creating segregated neighborhoods. But it wasn't just that. It was more than that. Some landlords outright refused to rent to black people. And that type of housing discrimination still has impacts today. We're going to open the KGW vault again and show you what a young black couple went through trying to find a place to live in Portland in 1967.
Young newlyweds Bob and Sharon Steen looked for over a month before they broke through the barrier. Bob is a senior in history at Portland State College. Sharon works for Blue Cross of Oregon. They were married in late August, and they finally located this apartment in northeast Portland, just off Sandy Boulevard.
One incident in particular, we called a certain apartment, and I gave the lady my name, and I asked her if it was possible if I could come over and look at her apartments. And she said fine, because she had some available. And it was a hot summer day, so when we got there, she had her door open. And as I stepped in the doorway, she looked up from her paper, and she said, "Oh, no, I'm sorry. We have nothing at all. Absolutely nothing." And so I said thank you, and I went on. And the next day, my wife called up, and she asked if she had anything available. And the lady said, yes, she had a very nice apartment that would be available for a nice couple.
Another time we went apartment hunting, we saw a vacancy sign on the door. We went up to the manager's apartment and knocked on the door, and they answered. And they said, "Oh, we don't have anything we could show you. We just don't have anything. We're all filled up." They said, but we don't discriminate at all, so why don't you come in and fill out one of these credit forms? So we walked in there, and we sat down and spent 20 minutes filling out this credit form. And then we left, and while we were walking out of the door, they said, "Don't call us, we'll call you."
We found the apartment that we're now in just by chance. We were out in the neighborhood looking for another apartment, and we saw it in the paper.
But I didn't want to go.
Well, but I talked her into it, and we kind of hemmed and hawed about it, and we stopped by. And I walked up to the door, and at the time the landlady was in the apartment cleaning it. And as I walked in, she said, "Would you like to look around?" I said, "Fine." So I called Sharon in, and she and her brother came in, and she looked at it, and she liked it very much.
Yeah, and the lady looked at us and said, "If you like it, it's ours." And that's the first time anybody said anything like that to us. So we took it right away.
It's interesting to look back and watch those clips. I know a lot of you have been really learning a lot and enjoying some of the clips that we've been showing from the KGW vault. So let us know if there's anything else you want us to look for in there. You can only imagine the stuff that we can find. The station's been here in this city for a long time doing stories like that. So email us at kgw.com or leave a comment on my Facebook page. We'll see what we can find for you. All right, we're almost finished here on the story. That means it's time to get that phone out right now. If you haven't, start a conversation with us. Head to my Facebook page. Use that hashtag HeyDan on Twitter. Slide into my DMs if you want. Email us. Look, it's all on the screen. We're reading the questions and comments that you have when we come back after the break. And we're also going to keep Portland weird a little bit with our own version of Chaz. It's just a little smaller, a little weirder. We're going to finish the story next. All right, we're keeping Portland weird tonight with Portland's very own, very tiny version of Chaz in Seattle, because somebody has turned Portland's own tiny park into the Mill Ends Park Autonomous Zone, or MIPAZ, I guess. I don't know. I haven't. It doesn't quite roll off the tongue. I get it. But they got the tiny protest signs, not a police officer in sight, and so far seems pretty peaceful down there. If you see something weird that you want to see too, you want us to check it out, send us a little picture, a link, or something. The story at kgw.com. You can find me on Twitter. Just use that hashtag HeyDan. We got some comments coming in. First, I want to mention, Multnomah County DA Rod Underhill, according to the Oregonian, has resigned, which means newly elected Mike Schmidt, who just won in a landslide, is going to get the job. He's saying in a press release that he has to apply to be appointed, but he was supposed to start on January 1st. So this is a significant bump up in time. So if he was sitting back and saying, all right, let me take some time and make some decisions here and see how this plays out over the next few months, looks like that's not the way it's going to be. It's going to be interesting to talk to him again. And Jack said to me, Dan, you promised to address two excuses for not wearing a mask, that they don't work, which we did address, and it's nobody's business but your own to decide if you wear one or not. He said that the second one is one that really sits with people in their hearts, saying it's not really anyone else's business to tell me what to do. I guess the piece was to describe that this is something that impacts all of us, meaning that it is all of our business, and it impacts businesses. This is very much about business and the way we conduct ours, every single person, and in my opinion, we should do everything we possibly can to try and curb this spread so we can open back up and people can have their livelihoods again. Thanks for being with us tonight. That's the story. Keep the conversations coming. I'll read them all. And as you see, they play a lot into what we do here on The Story. So thank you. As always, we'll see you tomorrow.